We have spent the last 6 months transforming the backyard of our 2-acre homestead by digging our own small pond. And I've made over 12 videos documenting the entire process. But it's finally full of water, and we're done for the winter. So I thought it would be a great time to recap the entire build from start to finish. Plus, I'm going to answer some of the most frequent questions we see in the comments and share some of my thoughts on what I would have maybe done differently along the way. But this was a fun project, and we had a perfect summer to do it, so hopefully you'll enjoy looking back with me on how all of this came to be.
Dig Drive DIY!
The desire to build my own pond was born many years ago because of 2 reasons. Number 1, I had a lot of fun swimming in them as a kid, and number 2, I wanted to drive a bulldozer when I grew up. So when I graduated from high school, I became a heavy equipment operator. I spent 10 years running bulldozers, excavators, dump trucks, and earth movers, and one of our company's specialties was digging ponds. And while digging so many ponds for others, I daydreamed about digging one of my own someday, and I knew what I would do to make it extra special too. Even after I finished college and moved on from career excavating, I still found myself doing side jobs in my spare time, and in 2009, I helped a close friend dig a nice big pond on his property, and then in 2010, I rented a pole pan and dug a pond for my brother at their new house. Although a pond can be beautiful and a ton of family fun, my wife and I still weren't sure that we wanted to give up our backyard for one. But after having our daughters in 2011, the thought of it started to creep back into our minds because from a very early age, these girls were in love with the water. And when the neighbors gave us their old above-ground swimming pool, it was settled. We were either going to have a swimming pool or a pond as a permanent fixture in our backyard. We're going to use her blueprint here. Clean up the stone slab. You can see my backhoe there and all this debris.
Step 2, set up the pool.
Work out flat and straight.
Fill the pool up, which is step number 3.
We're filling her up finally. We need Cousin Tony to bring us a tanker of water, don't we?
Yeah.
After a couple years of discussing it and months of stressing and planning, the deciding factors came to us out of the blue. We discovered that a close neighbor was actually filling in an old pond and they wanted dirt. Then, by chance, a close family friend offered to sell me his old dump truck at a really fair price. The stars seemed to be aligning, so if we ever wanted to dig our own pond, now was most certainly the time. So I bought that triaxle dump truck just for this project, and we decided to go for it. The decision to commit was still tough though, up to the very last day. We'd be giving up our backyard that we'd known for over 20 years. Girls are getting their last bit of use out of the playground. The girls weren't nearly as bothered by the moving of the swing set as they were by the thought of losing their favorite climbing trees. Please don't what? Making me sad, Ella. I can't say that I was heartbroken about losing those apple trees, though. They were a pain in the butt to clean up after every year, and we never really harvested too many good apples, so no love lost from me. But once they were down, there was no turning back. We settled on a final sketch of the pond and started by marking it all out on the ground. The digging of the stumps meant we had officially broken ground. At this point, I wasn't sure how long it was going to take me. I just really hoped for some dry weather, and one Saturday afternoon, I started and figured I'd take it day by day. Removing the topsoil is a very important step for any pond. Even if you want the top of the pond to be at or near your existing grade level, you need to remove the organic top layer to help prevent water loss because water can easily move through the topsoil. The objective is to get all of that good black dirt out of the top and replace it with a non-permeable dense clay layer from a greater depth. It took over 12 hours with my backhoe, but I skimmed off the 12 to 18 inches of good healthy soil on top and stockpiled it for later. If I ever wanted to grow grass around the pond though, I'd need to put some of it back, and then the rest I could sell or stockpile somewhere else for a project at a later date. Another way to help prevent the pond from leaking is to remove or dig back any drainage tiles in the area. A true sign of poorly drained soils with low permeability is the presence of drainage pipes, or tile as we call it. Farmers will install drainage tile in a designated pattern throughout their field in order to help keep water from lying on top of the surface. The clays of the subsoil are so heavy and dense that water will take a very long time to pass through the soil profile, leaving it perpetually wet on top. so the tile is installed to take the water away to a nearby ditch or stream. As we began to dig, I discovered one tile that ran through the center of the pond, so I had to dig it back in both directions away from the bank. A tile like this is perforated too, meaning it has little slits in the sides of it that allow water to get in, but they keep the dirt out. And they can draw water from up to 50 feet away in either direction, so it's important to get them removed and capped off. With the topsoil moved and the tiles dug back, it was time to start actually digging the hole. Life would be much simpler if I could have a bulldozer on this project, so I borrowed a John Deere 650 from my farming cousins, and that would prove to be a very worthy addition to this project. The dozer is a necessity for grading and shaping the pond banks to the desired slope, but I still needed to be able to dig and load dump trucks, so I borrowed my father-in-law's mini excavator and I used my old backhoe, and we started digging the dirt out of the center. At this point, it had been almost 6 months since I bought the triaxle, but it was finally time to put it to work. My dad hauled dirt with the General, and my cousin Tony showed up to drive my F750 single axle dump truck. I would jump back and forth between running the dozer and the backhoe. I could shape the banks and cut the pond to the desired shape with the dozer, and then use it to push the dirt up to within reach of both digging machines. This proved to be a very good way to do it because we were able to load almost every load from the same spot, and the haul path was lined up perfectly to go in and out of the driveway. And the ground was so dry that we hardly did any damage to the driveway, and we were able to get in and out of our dumping location with ease. It was all perfect and a very smooth process for the most part. Everything was going good. I just asked Dad how things were working. He said, just great. And then he called me 10 minutes later and said, there's a front tire blown out on the dump truck. So we're going into roadside assistance mode. Our only real hang up to the digging was a flat tire that we got on the dump truck, and luckily a friend of mine had a used tire that I was able to grab despite it being Memorial Day, and we DIY'd the repair in my shop and got the General back on the road in less than 4 hours from the time of the flat. If you've ever wondered why I called this channel Dig Drive DIY, well, this day is a perfect example of why. All right, well, that was about 4 hours total. It set us back that the General wasn't here, but you're going to have that kind of stuff when you buy used trucks, used equipment. Don't put on new tires, but... So we really had just one sun up to sundown day of digging, and then I kept digging every night for a week after work. And within 5 or 6 days, the dirt was all out of the hole and off-site. I mentioned that during my young days of digging ponds, I knew what I wanted to do to make mine special one day. Well, the unique feature of this pond that I had daydreamed about as a young operator was putting a sidewalk all the way around the perimeter. Not only would it provide better access to anywhere around the pond, but it would create a nice border between the grass of the yard and the inside bank near the water. It would be functional, look nice, and help with the maintenance effort. So in order to make it happen, I had to make sure the top was nice and level. I wanted the top of the sidewalk to be at a higher elevation than the surrounding yard, which would help prevent dirty water from entering the pond. I just needed to make sure I got the top as level as possible in order to pour the sidewalk on top later. Once the top was established, I was able to cut the slopes of the bank. I was always taught that the best scenario for weed control was to get the banks as steep as possible so that there was less of an area of shallow water where plants and unwanted weeds might be able to survive around the perimeter. But you don't want your banks so steep that they'll easily erode either. So we always used a slope of about 2.5 or 3 to 1. This is about the maximum slope a dozer like this can handle without losing traction and sliding down the bank. But it's also important to make the slope of the bank as consistent as possible around the perimeter too, so that water hits evenly at the same distance from the top elevation all the way around. If your bank slope is uneven, it can make the distance of the water's edge vary in and out from the inside edge of the sidewalk on top. The last thing I need to do is cut in the rock ledge. Now this is something I never did too often. We're going to mark 7 feet down from the top. And if you tried to dump rock on here right now, it would just all fall to the bottom. So you got to create a little bit of a ledge here. This was a shelf that would be used to hold a layer of rock all the way around the top of the pond. It would keep the rock from sliding down the bank. You can watch the full-length episode of this process if you're interested to hear my thoughts about putting weed barrier down underneath the rocks too. And one of the last things I got to do to finish up is get ready for concrete. We're going to have sidewalk going from this garage patio area out to the patio around the pond. So I got to get all this cut up. We were getting close to concrete time, so I was working every evening after work and all through the weekends to get things ready. The digging was done, and now I just needed to install an overflow pipe to provide a place of relief in case the pond ever did get too full. I don't think the overflow will ever see too much action since this pond doesn't take on any surface water drainage, but it's there just in case we get one of those big rains. The overflow was connected at a safe distance from the pond to the drainage tile that I had found and dug out earlier, and that will be able to take the water to a nearby stream in the event that it does overflow. All of our thoughts about the design and the planning and the wondering and the worrying are all going to be finalized today because we're getting ready to pour concrete. And I mean a lot of concrete. And there's no turning back or changing our minds once it starts. By far the most expensive out-of-pocket cost for this project was the concrete, no doubt. I felt that the concrete sidewalk must be connected though to a concrete pier. This would keep our look consistent and once again prevent any maintenance requirements that a normal wooden or tubular steel pipe pier might create. This is one area of the build that I would do a little bit differently because I think we over-engineered the footings for the pier. It's easy to see and say that now, but you got to remember that we've never done anything like this before. And when you're in that situation, a lot of DIY guys like me, they tend to overbuild stuff. Most likely we could have had smaller columns with less concrete and less footings, but I can't change it now. However, I do think it'll be just fine for many years to come. And if nothing else, the pier in itself is quite unique. And I actually love the way it looks and the way it turned out. All right, we got the footers and everything done for the pier and the deck. Now I'm going to start hauling stone around for the sidewalk and start to get that up to grade. The sidewalks look overwhelming, but that was kind of the easy part of this project. The biggest challenge of this entire process was making sure that the curves looked right. The easiest way for me to check the curves was to stand on top of the garage or use the drone to have a look. The pouring was actually pretty easy though, and quickly they made their way all the way around the thing and they were done by noon. Another one of the afterthought regrets is that we didn't make the sidewalk just 1 foot wider around the top. We made it 3 feet wide around the majority of the perimeter, and that'll work just fine, but 4 foot probably would have been better. We were just doing it to save money. The last bit of concrete work was capping off the pier. What we did with those little triangle pieces that Rick and I were cutting, we put those in the bottom corner of the form so that we have a nice chamfered or tapered edge on the bottom edge of the deck. That way when you're swimming up to it from underneath, there's no sharp corner. There was a lot of effort put into making sure it was solid and would hold up the weight of the concrete deck on top. This is going to be about 5 inches thick. We got lots of rebar coming up from the pilings. It's all been bent over and tied together here. Lots of viewers had opinions on the pier and how we should have done it differently, but I still like it. Time will tell if we made any structural mistakes, I guess. That'd be cool. Some viewers suggested that putting rock around the top gave the pond an industrial or retention pond look, but we actually prefer the look of a fresh, clean edge, and it prevents us from needing to mow this area, which on some ponds can be quite dangerous and difficult. The rock was installed after the sidewalk was poured because it created the perfect guide for where to place the rock. Without the concrete, we would have been guessing and most likely left a lot of work to do after the sidewalks were done. So it was very intentional that we did the rock afterwards. We chose crushed limestone because it's readily available and more closely matched the concrete. And it's relatively cheap compared to more decorative landscaping or river rocks too. And no, the pH of the water won't be negatively affected by the limestone. It's a very common practice in our area and it hasn't been known to harm any fish or humans. It's also not as difficult to walk on as many people might think too, but it's not meant to be walked on either. The beach area is where we intend to get in and out, and it would be pea gravel instead. The only thing left to do is this pea gravel on the beach now. The best performing video of this entire series is this one right here. And there were a lot of viewer opinions about putting pea gravel in the beach rather than sand. But our sand is actually just super tiny rocks because we don't have any literal beach sand available. But in hindsight, I may have been tempted to line more of the banks and anywhere that someone could touch bottom with this pea gravel. Again, we were just trying to save money though, and 2 loads of this stuff was expensive enough. But you've got to admit that that slinger truck was pretty cool to watch. We might have been able to put stones in the beach prior to the sidewalk being there, and that would have helped avoid some mess, but I didn't get it scheduled out in time, and we waited nearly 2 weeks for those loads as it was. So, with the excavating, concrete, and stone all finished, we were getting anxious for some water in this thing. On the 4th of July weekend, we decided to have a well driving party with the help of some family members, and we tried to drive our own Sandpoint well to find water. We know that there's water available down there, but the dense clay layer capped over the top of that sandy aquifer provided to be too difficult to drive through. We gave it our best shot though, and I learned quite a bit along the way. Despite it being a failure, this is actually one of my best memories of digging this pond because I worked alongside my dad and my father-in-law, my uncles, and my brother, and my cousins. The amount of effort and help I had from family members during the course of this entire build is what made it all possible. And this DIY well project exemplifies how much value there is in working together. And yes, now I owe all of these guys some favors. My next favorite part about this build was doing the finish work around the top. I got to use about every piece of equipment I have to make this happen. This is literally like icing on a cake because the end result is so satisfying to see finished. Not only did we finish grading around the top of the pond, but we also hauled out all of the leftover topsoil with both triaxle dump trucks I had at the time. This was my last time using the General and the first time that I got to use my new-to-me truck, Louie. With the topsoil piles moved out and all the finished grading done, it was time to get it seeded before the late summer rains arrived. At least we would hope. I borrowed a seeder from those same farmer cousins of mine, and if it had weighed 5 pounds more, I don't think the 755 would have been able to lift it. But luckily, I was able to quickly get everything all seated around the top, and after the seeding, we got another round of help from both my wife and I's parents. Along with our daughters, we covered everything with straw mats in an effort to keep the straw from blowing into the pond, and then as luck would have it, a few well-timed rains arrived, and within a week, we had grass growing. And within 2 weeks, we had a very nice standing lawn. It's hard to believe now that we mowed that 3 times before getting our first frost. This is likely the part of the build that gives me the most regret. Not because we hired a professional to come in and drill a new well, but because I didn't get it lined up sooner. I had known all along that I would likely want to put down a new well for both our house and to keep this pond full. So I should have scheduled it earlier on so that when the pond was completely done, we could have filled it up right away. But I'll just have to keep that in mind for the next pond, I guess. It didn't take long for the pros to drill down to 68 feet, find good water, and finish up our 5-inch well. We got a new submersible well pump installed a week later and finally turned on the water. It's a moment of truth. We're gonna see if it works. Switch is on. Oh, it's getting heavy. Now we wanted hot water. We worked hard all summer. Hoped that we'd made all the right decisions and that we wouldn't find too many regrets in the years to come. There were things we would have changed, but in a lot of ways, wouldn't have done anything differently. It took 6 months to get to the point of actively filling the pond with water, and just 6 days to get it completely full. Even though the girls had already been in the shallow water of the pond as it filled up, I had promised them that I would jump in as soon as the water hit the overflow pipe. So the only thing left to do was to hold up my end of the deal. Count of 3. 1, 2, 3, go! Oh no!
Holy snickerdoodle!
Well, whether you're a faithful viewer and you've watched the entire pond build from start to finish, or you joined us somewhere along the way, I'd like to sincerely thank you for checking out these pond videos. We'll have more to come next summer as we work to make this our own little backyard oasis, so be sure to check back in from time to time. And in the meantime, I'm sure I'll find plenty of other projects to keep me busy over the winter, and spring for that matter, and if I'm lucky, I'll see you back here for all of that. Thanks for watching.